What's up, everybody? Welcome back to kind of part number 2 on the Civic here. So today I got off the flywheel, the pressure plate, and the clutch disc. I took it all out. We're going to go ahead and take a look at it and see what we're working with, and it's pretty bad. So we've got all our new parts already. These are our shift bushings. So I've got the change rod bushing, and then I've got the just the shifter bushing. The change rod bushing is the round one, and then the longer one is the actual shifter bushing. So we'll set that aside, and I'll show you all of our new parts on our clutch assembly here. So we have our new clutch disc, and we've got our new release bearing, and new input shaft bearing, output shaft bearing rather, sorry, and then our alignment tool, and then our pressure plate is underneath there. But just to give you an idea, this clutch disc doesn't make any noise. It's the wrapper making noise, but you don't hear anything from that. No cracks, none of that stuff. So we have none of that to worry about. Our new pressure plate also will be perfectly clamping down like it should be. So alright, so what we've got here is our release bearing. This would be your item that would be on the clutch fork that would press out the, press on the pressure plate to release the clutch from the pressure plate and the flywheel. So I already showed you guys that this guy was pretty bad. I don't know if I'll be able to spin it or not, but it makes a lot of noise, that's the point. So anyway, you can see it's pretty nasty. Things like that should not be on the car. It's been a long time since it's been replaced, I'm sure of it. Brings us to our flywheel, our pressure plate. So we'll take that off with the flywheel. Got a lot of grooves in it. I don't know how well it's visible, but it's definitely got a lot of grooves in it. Very shiny, which means that it's probably been overheated and worn down pretty bad. Just like if your rotors do the same. So we'll set that aside here. We've already got all our new items, but this is probably the worst part, is the clutch disc itself. So if I can get this thing to focus, I want to show you that there's a crack in the actual flywheel here, or I'm sorry, in the clutch disc. There's a crack that runs from, right about here all the way through where the spring goes. And the reason we were hearing all that noise is because of the clutch disc. So if you listen, that's not a good sound. You should not hear any noise from your clutch disc at all. And all the springs are worn and things like that. So that's pretty much what that sound comes from. Another thing, this is the front face that would be facing the clutch. It'd be facing you as you took it off. This is the flywheel. And I noticed that the bearing, you can't really see it very well, but let's see if I can show you guys. The bearing isn't even flush with the flywheel anymore, and it should be flush right in there, and it's not. I was just looking at the factory service manual, and it says that it should be flush. So somehow this bearing also got pushed back, or someone installed it improperly, because you can see that it's sticking out the back of the case here, and this should be flush with the case. So this bearing probably wasn't even seated properly in the first place, so we're going to definitely replace all that stuff, so don't worry. So I also changed my mind on how I want to approach this clutch job as well, because originally I was going to take the transmission apart because there was so much metal in the oil and kind of check it out and see what we're working with, but I already know it's no good. I'm betting that it's no good. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put this new clutch in, I'm going to put everything back together, and I'm going to try and see how it drives with the new bushings, the new clutch, and all that stuff. If I don't get any noise, I'm not going to worry about it. If I do get more noise, then we know we've eliminated the clutch as an issue. So we'll go ahead and just replace the transmission, which I've already sourced one. I know I can get one. And we're pretty much going to go from there. But I figured I'd start with the cheapest thing first, changing the clutch out, and then I could show you guys what it looks like when the clutch is bad, things like that. So we obviously know that clutch is no good. The disc is broken, the pressure plate is all damaged, and the flywheel, the bearing, the output shaft bearing inside the flywheel is trashed as well, and it looks like someone installed it improperly. Either that, or over time it just got worked backwards, which is not good. If there's any slack there, either the flywheel needs to be replaced or the bearing needs to be replaced. So anyway, like I said, let's get to it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the input or output shaft bearing. So to do that, we use a punch and punch out one side of the bearing, and it'll start making it crooked inside the bore, and then we can knock it out. The other one will just get pressed in flush, which we're going to use a hammer to do as well with a little bit of oil, and I'll show you guys how to do that. So I'm going to show you the best I can because I don't have a tripod and I'm using a cell phone. So I do have a tripod, but I'm using a cell phone because my camera's damaged. So the first thing we're going to do is grab a punch, and we're going to take that punch and grab the edge of the bearing and just tap away, and it should knock that baby right out with not really any problems. Looks like she came out the back here, so we can see it coming out the back side here. So there she goes. So now she's all nice and removed. So it looks like the bearing comes in from the back though, so we'll have to install it from the back. There's actually a ridge here, which you can probably barely even see. There's a ridge there that you have to set the bearing on. So it looks like maybe this wasn't pushed out. It was right where it needs to be. It's just old. So let's flip this guy down and get this new one in there. Looks like there's something on the bench. Alright guys, so this is the best possible shot I could give you. Sorry about that. Here is our old bearing. Kind of makes some noise. Doesn't really spin very freely, if you can hear that. Has a lot of movement inside, so it's got some slack in it, so we're going to go ahead and replace that. It looks like this clutch kit that's here now, that was already on the car, is from Dakin. I don't know who Dakin is. I think Dakin is who Exity used to be, but I'm not exactly sure. So like I said, if it is a Dakin original clutch from the factory, then 10 to 1, this thing has never been replaced like I said prior. So this is our new bearing. What we're going to do is we're going to set it right here for a moment. I'm going to take my glove off. I'm going to open this little packet here of grease. I'm going to put just a tiny bit on the outside to help it drive in. So we'll open that guy up here. Take our bearing. And I'm talking a very small amount if we can get it out of there. So that's all I really need. I just want enough to help drive this guy in. So we'll just give it a little bit on the outside. Okay, and then we'll make sure that the hole is nice and clean. Set her on there. And I'm going to grab a rubber mallet to drive this in because it won't damage anything. Alright, so I've got my mallet. I'm going to go ahead and just tap this guy right on in there. It'll go in very easy. This should never be really hard. And if it is, then that is a problem. Alright, looks like we're completely in. We're almost flush though, so I still think that that bearing was backing its way out. So, yeah. And you can actually see that there's some lines of wear on this where it might have been spinning in the hole there. So anyway, so she's in there now. We'll take a look at this front side. So yeah, it is supposed to recess backwards, it looks like. So not really a big deal. So that means that however the other one was sitting is totally fine. But we know that we're in there. She spins freely. It is completely pressed down into its ridge there. So we're all set to put this back on the car and torque it down. Alright, so I got our flywheel back on the car. And before we go ahead and reinstall the clutch assembly and the transmission, let's go take a look at our shifter linkage assembly over here on the workbench. Right, so I pulled off the shifter linkage assembly to try and clean up some of the slop that is in it. I already have this rear bushing back here. I mean, these parts are just unbelievably worn. So what I'm end up doing is just wire wheel all this stuff off, repaint these parts so they won't rust as bad. But this is one of the bushings that we've got, which was completely sloppy in there. Also, not only was the shifter sloppy, but some moron hung the exhaust on the linkage that has already got slop in it. So if you look at this thing, if I can get my camera to focus here, it's got quite a bit of slack in it. I mean, it's awful. And I don't really know how I'm going to fix that yet. I'm thinking about just welding a couple washers to the shaft of the actual shifter and seeing how seeing how that turns out. So that's pretty much what I'm trying to do here, is just take care of that slop. If I can get this apart without much trouble, I'll wire wheel it all down and I'll just buy the new bushings. But at the same time, I don't really want to wait on anything. Once I put this together, I want to just finish it. This was a $300 car. I don't want to start spending money, recklessly on something like this. So coming down at this end here, we've got our change rod bushing at the end, which is just, you can see that's pretty bad. I've got a new one of those as well. Another thing I noticed that, when I took everything off, was that I can't remember what this is called, but the end where the spring pin connects to the transmission doesn't even move. It's so locked up that this entire thing, I can't move it by hand at all. So I'm going to have to spend some time, put it in the vise, and get this thing to move again, because it definitely should be moving. That alone could have frozen, while sitting in that yard, and caused the other bushings to be, worn down too much, because there's no give in this U-joint kind of assembly here. So I'm going to go ahead and spray it down with some lubricant, and then I'm going to grab I'm just going to use a 1/4 inch or 3/8 extension and just rock this thing back and forth. Try and get it to move again, because it definitely should be moving. There's no way this thing should be stiff like this. So yeah, let's get to it. So what we've got is we've got the rod here, and we're going to go ahead and just kind of get some. I'll take my welding torch and move it. We're just going to lube this guy up a little bit and see if we can get him to move at all, because it definitely should not be this stiff. And this car sat a long time, I think since 2017, so it wouldn't surprise me that, this is an issue. There we go. Getting somewhere. It moved at least. Wow, that's pretty bad. That's taking a lot of force to do. Alright, well, I'm going to work with this for a while, and I will get back to you guys. Alright guys, well, I've made some progress, and I didn't think I was going to. So, what I've been doing is, pretty much I've just been sitting here with this in here, just doing this for the longest time, and then doing this, trying to get these loose. I drilled a very small hole. You can barely see it through there now, probably. Yeah, you can't even see it. I drilled a very small hole right there, and I've been using that hole to put in penetrating oil, and it's actually worked really well, and it did the same thing on this one. So that's pretty much what we're working with, guys. We got it to move. I was very skeptical about getting this thing to move again because of just how long it had sat. But this is perfect. This is pretty much right where it should be working, so I'm super happy. I'm going to clean all this up when I'm done and paint it, but to come down here and look is another story. Pretty much the shifter is just wallered out like hell. I don't know how long that would last before it broke, to be honest. This is the collar that was in there that would hold on to the bushings. Total trash, obviously. This is what the bushing would ride on inside there, and it's just bad. So obviously there was just no it was just enough slack in there for the shifting to just be awful. So we're going to go ahead and take these two bolts off. They have a flat nut on the other side. I don't even know if these will come off without breaking. The assembly barely came down without breaking, so we'll see. That's pretty much what we're doing, and then I'll replace this rear, the rear bushing that goes here. I thought this would be really weak because it just looks like it would be pretty weak coming off the car, but it looks pretty strong. It's actually pretty strong. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I've got my wire wheel on my air compressor, on my air tool, and I'm going to go ahead and just get this thing apart, clean it up really good, clean up all the parts really good. I'm going to grease the living shit out of pretty much any spot that, I can, and that's pretty much it. I may even take these pins off of here, and then grease the insides of everything on this entire assembly, and then use the same size nut and bolt to put through to put it back together. That may be a good option to keep it from wearing so fast. Anyway, that's pretty much where we're at, guys, and then we can go ahead and put this thing back in the car once we get all the slop taken care of. I don't know if I can get these bushings. I think in the factory service manual I saw the part number for them. Actually, we can go take a look at that and see if I can find out if there's a part number on it. So here in the factory service manual, you can see the collar and then these two bushings, you know, that would go on either end. So it's called the rear joint bushing. Yeah, and it shows to grease them. So I'm going to go order those rear joint bushings. I'm sure they can't be crazy, you know, crazy expensive. And then once we have those, we'll get that back on the car, because obviously I want to get all the slop out of the shift the best that I can before I put it all back together. I don't want to take it apart again. So as cheap as possible, I'm going to get this thing working, and we'll get it all back in the car.